Elara Vance didn't talk much. She was the kind of woman who moved with a quiet purpose, her hands always busy with some task. After serving 30 years in the Army, she had come to Harmony Creek, Ohio, to find a peace she hadn't known since she was a girl. She wasn't looking for a fight. She just wanted a small, green patch of land where the loudest sound was the wind, not a command. The town, small and proud, saw her as an outsider. They saw a woman in her late 50s, with a strong jaw and kind, tired eyes, who had bought the old Miller place on the outskirts of town. They saw her, but they didn't really see her. To them, she was just Elara Vance, a recent retiree from some government job she didn't talk about. Some of the younger men sitting at the counter of the town diner would make jokes about her, calling her the lady soldier, in a mocking tone, as if a woman couldn't truly be tough. She just smiled faintly and kept to herself, buying her supplies at the local hardware store and nodding to folks on the street. Her heart, which had seen more than most could imagine, simply ached with the loneliness of it all. She wasn't used to this kind of small-mindedness. The real trouble started when Mayor Thorndyke came calling. Richard Thorndyke was a big man in a small town, a loud, self-important man who ran a powerful land development company. He wanted to buy Elara's property. Not just her house, but the entire 20 acres, especially the dense wooded wetlands in the back. He stood on her porch, his expensive shoes scuffing the worn wood, and offered her a price that was insulting. It was a price that told her he thought she was clueless. He told her he was going to build Harmony Hills, a new community that would change the town forever. "It's a nice place, ma'am," he said, puffing out his chest. "But you don't know the first thing about developing land. I'm doing you a favor, taking this off your hands." Elara's gaze, steady as a rifle scope, met his. "I'm not selling, Mayor." He laughed, a sharp, unpleasant sound. "Everyone has a price, darling." "Not me," she replied, her voice low and firm. From that day on, Elara's peace was shattered. The first sign was a campaign of small, mean little things. Her mailbox was knocked over. Trash was dumped on her lawn. The local paper, owned by one of Thorndyke's friends, started running stories about her, twisting her refusal into a selfish act, holding back progress for the whole town. The whispers and the looks followed her everywhere. She was no longer just an outsider. She was the enemy of Harmony Creek. Elara knew this game. She had seen it on a bigger scale, in places with names that made your stomach turn. She had seen how people, when united by a loud voice and a promise of gain, could become a mob. In her mind, she began to call them the Germans, a reference not to a nation, but to an overwhelming, faceless force that sought to overrun her ground. She knew that behind Mayor Thorndyke stood a network of his employees, the town council he had bought and paid for, and the many townspeople who saw a quick payday in her defeat. She counted them up in her mind, a faceless army of 250 people, all ready to tear down her fence and take what was hers. The loneliness was the worst part. She was used to being alone, but not this kind of alone. This was a deep, cold silence that cut through the Ohio sunshine. She would sit on her porch swing, watching the setting sun, and remember the quiet strength of her fellow soldiers, the unspoken bonds of trust. She felt a profound sense of injustice. They were mocking her, insulting her, not for who she was, but for what they thought she was. A woman they thought they could push around. They had no idea what she was truly capable of. They had no idea that a soldier's war wasn't just fought with guns, but with a quiet, unyielding will. She decided then that she would not be moved. This was her ground, and she would hold it, no matter the cost. The little acts of meanness grew bolder. One morning, Elara found her garden, the one she had spent months tilling and planting, ripped to shreds. The young tomato plants lay broken, their leaves trampled into the rich, dark soil. Another day, someone spray-painted a cruel word on her barn door. The harassment wasn't about the land anymore. It was personal. It was meant to break her, but they didn't understand who they were dealing with. Elara Vance was a soldier, and a soldier doesn't break. She planned her counterattack not with anger, but with the cool, practiced precision of a military operation. She started gathering intelligence. She spent a small fortune on hidden cameras, placing them on her property line, disguised as birdhouses and landscape lights. She bought a small, powerful recording device and carried it with her in town, its microphone tiny and almost invisible. She meticulously logged every act of vandalism, every insult, every whisper, creating a digital war journal. Each entry included a date, a time, and a description of the event. She was building a case not for the local police, who always came, looked around, and shook their heads, but for a higher court. Her routine became a part of the war. She would wake before the sun, patrol her fence line, check the cameras, and then go about her day as if everything were normal. The quiet purpose in her movements became a kind of defiance. She was holding her ground without firing a single shot. This was her front line, and the Thorndikes and their followers were her enemy. One afternoon, in the quiet back corner of the town library, Ilara met Lily. Lily was a young woman, maybe in her early 20s, with a restless energy and a curious mind. She was a reporter for the Harmony Creek Gazette, a tiny paper that most people used to wrap their fish. Lily had been trying to write a story about the Thorndike development, and she had run into a stone wall. No one would talk to her. Every door was shut in her face. The big advertisers threatened to pull their money if she wrote anything negative. Ilara, sitting in a quiet corner with a book on organic farming, watched Lily's frustration build. When the young woman finally threw her hands up in defeat, Ilara simply said, "They're all tied up, aren't they?" Lily jumped, surprised. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice sharp with suspicion. "Someone who's been pushing against the same wall you have," Ilara said softly. Over a cup of coffee at the local cafe, away from the prying eyes of the town diner, Ilara told Lily what was happening. She didn't exaggerate or complain. She simply stated the facts like an officer giving a report. She showed Lily her log, the time-stamped photos of her broken fence, the recording of a man yelling at her from his truck. Lily's eyes widened. She had thought Ilara was just a difficult old woman, like everyone said. Now she saw a quiet strength and a deep, unshakable will. "You're fighting them, all of them, alone," Lily whispered, her mind racing with the possibilities of the story. "Not alone anymore," Ilara said, giving her a small, knowing smile. Lily began to help. She had access to town records and knew how to dig. She found old land deeds, financial records, and voting patterns from the town council. She discovered that Mayor Thorndike's company had a long history of buying up land on the cheap, using back channels, and then suddenly getting approval for big, profitable projects. It was a pattern of corruption that went back decades. Ilara's land was just the latest target. The 250 Germans, as Ilara thought of them, were not just a mob of angry townspeople. They were a well-oiled machine of greed and corruption. Ilara had stumbled into their system, and they were trying to grind her into dust. The fight was no longer just about Ilara's land. It was about justice. They were a team now, the old soldier and the young reporter, fighting a secret war in a small, unsuspecting town. The harassment didn't stop, but now Ilara had a partner. The insults still hurt, the loneliness still crept in, but she now had a purpose far greater than just protecting her land. She was fighting for the soul of Harmony Creek. The emotional toll was heavy, but the will to see this through was stronger than ever. The climax was coming. She knew it. The Thorndike family, sensing their opponent was not backing down, escalated their war. Mayor Thorndike's son, a smirking young man named Kyle, began to show up on Ilara's property more often. He would park his big truck on the shoulder of the road, just outside her fence, and stare at her. He didn't say anything. He just watched. It was an intimidation tactic, meant to make her feel unsafe and exposed. Ilara, with her old soldier's discipline, simply ignored him, but the quiet, constant presence of his truck felt like a new kind of threat. Ilara and Lily, meanwhile, were putting the final pieces of their puzzle together. Lily, using her credentials as a reporter, managed to get her hands on some dusty old deeds and voting records. She found a paper trail that showed a clear pattern. Whenever a large development was approved by the town council, the votes were almost always unanimous, and a few weeks later, Mayor Thorndike's company would buy a different, seemingly unrelated piece of land in the area. It was a classic shell game, a web of lies and bribes that was almost impossible to prove without a smoking gun. They needed something more, something that would tie the mayor directly to the corruption. The big break came from an unlikely source. A disgruntled employee from the mayor's company who had been fired and was now looking for a way to get back at his old boss. The man, an accountant named Jim, had a box of old files. He had seen the corruption firsthand, the bribes, the under-the-table deals, the way Thorndyke would buy up land for pennies on the dollar and then push through a huge development plan that made his property value skyrocket. Jim was scared, but he was also angry. He gave the files to Lily in a dark corner of a coffee shop, his hands shaking as he passed over the box. Inside the box were copies of bank transfers, text messages from the mayor to his council members, and records of secret meetings. It was a treasure trove of evidence, more than they could have ever hoped for. Now they had the smoking gun. They had the proof they needed to expose not just the land deal on Alara's property, but the entire network of corruption that was choking the life out of Harmony Creek. But Mayor Thorndyke was a powerful and dangerous man. He had eyes and ears everywhere. He figured out that Jim had given them something. In a desperate act, he tried to turn the tables on Alara. He sent Kyle to her farm, not just to watch, but to do something truly awful. One dark night, Alara was working late in her barn, fixing a tractor. She heard a noise outside. She grabbed a heavy wrench and slipped out the back. There, in the dim glow of her yard lights, she saw Kyle Thorndyke. He was holding a small container, and he was pouring something over the foundation of her house. It was a flammable liquid. She saw his face twisted with a sneer. He wasn't just trying to scare her anymore. He was trying to ruin her. She knew in that instant she had to make a sacrifice. She couldn't let him burn her house down, but she also couldn't let him get away without proof of his act. Alara stepped out from the shadows. "What are you doing, boy?" she said, her voice like steel. Kyle jumped, startled. He dropped the container, and the rest of the liquid sloshed on the ground. He had been caught red-handed. He froze, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and rage. This was her moment. She could call the police, but she knew they would side with him. They would say she was lying or that she had set it up herself. He would deny everything, and the town would believe him. She needed a witness, an unbiased one. She had a choice to make. She could fight him, but that would only end in a messy confrontation that would let him get away. Or she could do something only a soldier would consider. She could give him what he wanted for a moment, to expose the truth. "The game is over, Kyle," she said, her voice calm. Enraged, he lunged at her. He pushed her hard, and she stumbled backward, her head hitting the side of the barn with a sickening thud. She crumpled to the ground, feigning unconsciousness. Kyle, seeing her down, panicked. He scrambled to his truck and sped away, leaving the container and the evidence behind. Lying on the ground, the stars blurring above her, Alara felt the pain in her head, but also a deep sense of triumph. She had the proof. She had the recordings of his truck pulling up, the camera footage of him pouring the liquid, and now she had a police report waiting to be filed, a report that she knew would be ignored. This was her final card. She would give them the false report, let them make a show of ignoring it, and then she would unleash the truth. She was a soldier, and a soldier always plans 2 steps ahead. The next day, Alara went to the police station, her head throbbing. The local sheriff, a tall, slow-moving man named Carl, who was a close friend of Mayor Thorndyke's, listened to her story with a bored look on his face. He wrote down her statement, but his pen moved slowly, and his eyes kept flicking to the clock. He treated her not like a victim, but like a nuisance. He told her there wasn't enough evidence and that it was probably a prank. "A boy's just being a boy, Alara," he said, using her first name as if they were old friends. It was a final insulting blow. This was exactly what Alara had planned. The moment of her apparent defeat was the moment of her victory. She and Lily had organized a public meeting at the town hall for that evening. They announced it as an open forum to discuss the future of the Harmony Creek development. Mayor Thorndyke and his supporters, confident in their power, saw it as a chance to publicly humiliate Alara one last time. The town hall was packed. All 250 of them were there, the mayor, his council members, the angry townspeople, and the few curious onlookers. The mayor stood at the podium, beaming, talking about progress, jobs, and the bright future of Harmony Creek. He didn't mention Ilara's name, but everyone in the room knew who he was talking about when he spoke of people who stand in the way of change. When he was done, he opened the floor for questions. Ilara, her head still hurting, stood up. A hush fell over the room. The mayor's smirk widened. He thought she was going to plead with them. "Mayor Thorndyke," she said, her voice clear and strong, "I would like to show everyone what your progress truly looks like." He started to object, but Lily, sitting in the front row, was already projecting a video onto the screen behind the podium. The video was from Ilara's hidden camera. It showed Kyle Thorndyke, the mayor's son, in the dead of night, pouring liquid onto the foundation of her house. The gasps were audible. People started to whisper. The mayor's face turned white, but Ilara wasn't done. Lily's fingers flew across her laptop. The next video was a compilation of hidden camera footage. Mayor Thorndyke and his council members in a secret meeting in a back room of the diner, shaking hands and passing envelopes. The audio was crystal clear. It was the accountant's recording. You could hear the mayor's voice, low and confident, talking about the bribes and the land deals, about how he owned this town. The room was stunned into silence. It was a silence deeper than the one Ilara had felt in her lonely farm. This was the silence of 250 people, all of whom had been complicit, now faced with the truth. They looked at the screen, and then at the mayor, and then at Ilara. They had mocked her, insulted her, and now she was holding them all in her hand, exposed. Ilara walked to the podium, her head held high. She looked out at the faces in the crowd. They weren't an enemy anymore. They were just people who had been fooled. She told them about her past, not with pride, but with the quiet dignity of a person who had seen much of the world. She told them she was a retired sergeant major, that she had served her country for 30 years, and that she knew a fight when she saw one. "You called me an enemy of progress," she said, her voice soft but powerful. "But all I was doing was holding my ground. You thought you were fighting a lonely old woman, but you were fighting a soldier." The mayor, his face a mask of defeat, could only stare. The town, which had so easily turned on her, now felt a deep sense of shame. They had been left speechless, stunned. She had faced them all alone, and she had won, not with a weapon, but with a simple, powerful truth. The aftermath was a storm. The videos and recordings went viral, first in the small town, then on local news channels, and finally on national news. The pressure was too great for even the compromised local authorities to ignore. The sheriff, embarrassed by his earlier dismissal, was forced to open a full investigation. The state police and the FBI got involved, and the entire Thorndyke operation began to crumble. Mayor Thorndyke, his face a gray mask of defeat, was led away in handcuffs. The town council members were all removed from their positions. Harmony Creek was in shock. Ilara Vance, the quiet woman who had been mocked and insulted, was now a hero. The townspeople, humbled and ashamed, came to her. They brought her baskets of baked goods, offered to help her with her garden, and apologized in low, sincere voices. The young reporter, Lily, became a local sensation, her story a powerful testament to the power of a small paper and a determined young woman. But Ilara's redemption wasn't in their praise. It wasn't in the town's forgiveness. Her true victory was a quiet, personal one. She had proven to herself and to the world that a soldier's strength wasn't just about fighting in a war. It was about standing your ground against any enemy, no matter how big, and never, ever giving up. For weeks, the town was a whirlwind of activity, but Ilara remained the same. She still went to the hardware store, still nodded to people, but now the looks she got were of deep respect and gratitude. The loneliness she had felt was gone, replaced by a deep sense of peace. The land she had fought for was finally hers, truly hers, safe from the greed and corruption that had tried to steal it. The twistin' a perfect autumn day. With the leaves just starting to turn gold, Ilara sat on her porch with Lily, looking out at the woods and the wetlands. A man with a clipboard walked up her driveway. He was a contractor, a good man from a neighboring town who had heard about her story. "Sergeant Major," he said, using her military rank with a respect that brought a lump to her throat. I've got the final plans drawn up. We can start the foundation next month. Lily looked at him, confused. Plans? What plans? Alara smiled, a slow, deep smile that reached her eyes. She got up and walked to a small table on her porch, picking up a rolled-up blueprint. She unrolled it for Lily to see. It wasn't a blueprint for a house or a barn. It was the plan for a sprawling, beautiful campus. It showed a quiet living area, a small, modern medical clinic, a therapy center, and a beautiful garden with a small pond in the middle. The name at the top of the plan was written in bold letters. Harmony Creek Veterans Rehabilitation Center. This land, Alara said softly, her voice full of emotion, was never just mine. When I retired, I saw too many good men and women coming home with scars you couldn't see. I knew I had to do something. This place, this quiet little corner of the world, it was the perfect spot, a place where soldiers could come home and find their own peace. Lily's eyes filled with tears. She realized that Alara hadn't been fighting for her own property. She had been fighting for something far bigger, something more important. She had been fighting for her fellow soldiers, the 250 Germans, the greedy mayor, his corrupt council, and the small-minded townspeople had seen her as a selfish old woman. They had underestimated her, mocked her, and tried to break her. But she had held her ground, not just for herself, but for all the soldiers she had served with. The battle she had fought wasn't about land. It was about honor. And in the end, her quiet, unwavering strength had left them all stunned, exposed, and finally brought justice and hope to a place that had lost its way. She was a soldier, and her war was never truly over. It was simply fought for a new and higher purpose.